Did you ever think you knew everything about the Vikings, those legendary seafarers and warriors from around 793 AD to 1066 AD? Do you picture only rugged men with horned helmets charging into battle? What if much of what you learned about Viking women, the ones living, breathing, and thriving in that dynamic age, was completely off the mark? Number one, Viking women had no legal standing or rights. Many narratives about the Viking Age often portray women as little more than possessions, their lives entirely dictated by the men around them. A common perception suggests they were without legal rights, their voices unheard in the important halls of justice and power. It is easy to picture them as entirely subservient, without agency in matters of law or property. Oh, but digging into the historical and archaeological record reveals a different story altogether. The laws of the Viking Age, particularly those preserved in later Icelandic codes like Gragas, show a society where women possess surprisingly robust legal rights. They could own land, inherit property, and even initiate divorce, a stark contrast to many other European societies of the time. Consider the concept of the dowry, known as haemaphilia. This was not merely a gift from a bride's family to her new husband. Instead, the dowry was property that remained legally the woman's own even after marriage. She brought these assets into the marriage, and she retained control over them. If the marriage ended, or if her husband died, this property reverted fully to her, not to his family. This system provided Viking women with a financial foundation and a measure of economic independence that was uncommon elsewhere. It was a tangible form of security reflecting their legal standing as individuals capable of holding and managing wealth. Beyond the dowry, there was also the Morgangafa, the mourning gift. This was a gift from the husband to the wife on the morning after the wedding, typically given as a confirmation of the marriage and as a form of security for the wife. Like the dowry, the mourning gift became the wife's personal property. It provided her with additional assets that she could use or manage as she saw fit, further strengthening her economic position. These two forms of property ownership meant that many Viking women entered and sustained marriages with significant assets under their own legal control, not merely as an extension of their husband's wealth. Divorce, a concept almost unthinkable for women in many parts of medieval Europe, was a recognized legal possibility for Viking women. Saga literature, while sometimes fictionalized, often reflects contemporary legal norms and societal customs. In Ingjald's saga, Hallgerdr, a powerful and complex female character, divorces her second husband, Glumr, after he strikes her. Later, she divorces her third husband, Gunnar, because he slaps her. The sagas describe these acts of violence as valid grounds for a wife to end a marriage. The law code of Gragas also outlines specific grounds for divorce, including a husband's impotence, prolonged absence, or certain types of violence or humiliation. A woman could initiate these proceedings herself. The process involved declaring oneself divorced in front of witnesses, often at public assemblies or legal gatherings known as things. This ability to dissolve a marriage on her own terms provided a critical layer of personal autonomy for Viking women. It allowed them an escape from unbearable situations, demonstrating that their consent and well-being held legal weight. When men were away on long voyages, whether for trade, raiding, or exploration, women often assumed the role of head of the household. This was not merely a temporary arrangement, it involved full legal and economic responsibility. They managed farms, oversaw laborers, conducted trade, and even represented their families at local assemblies. The sagas are full of examples of women running complex estates for years while their husbands or sons were abroad. They made crucial decisions about planting, harvesting, animal husbandry, and household finances. This practical necessity was underpinned by their legal right to act on behalf of the household, a right that ensured the continuity and prosperity of their families and communities. The absence of a man did not mean the legal vacuum of a household. Instead, it highlighted the existing legal capacity of the woman. Inheritance laws further supported women's legal standing. And daughters could inherit from their fathers and wives from their husbands. While sons might often receive a larger share, particularly of certain types of land, daughters were not disinherited. They had a legal right to a portion of the family's wealth. If a family had no sons, daughters inherited everything. This was not a minor provision. It meant that female lines could continue to hold significant wealth and influence across generations. A woman who became a widow with no living sons would inherit her husband's property. This meant she could continue to run the farm, manage the family assets, and even choose to remarry or remain independent. Her legal right to inherit provided economic stability and status, preventing destitution and maintaining the family's social standing. Archaeological evidence also hints at the legal and economic power of women. grave goods found in female burials often include keys, which symbolize authority over the household and its provisions. And keys were not merely practical tools, they were markers of status and responsibility, signifying the woman's role as mistress of the household with control over its stores and valuables. In many Viking graves, women are found buried with balances and weights, tools typically associated with trade and commerce. While traditionally assumed to be male tools, their presence in female graves suggests that women were directly involved in economic transactions, not just as consumers, but as active participants in buying and selling goods. This points to a broader economic role than just domestic tasks, reinforcing their legal capacity to engage in commercial activities. Public assemblies, known as things, were central to Viking Age law and governance. While men typically spoke and debated, women were not entirely absent. They could attend these gatherings, and sometimes, particularly in the absence of a male family member, a woman might represent her household's interests. The sagas occasionally depict women speaking at things, making claims, or seeking justice. Though perhaps not as frequent as male participation, their presence and occasional involvement indicate that the legal system acknowledged their capacity to engage with the law. Their voices, though perhaps not always heard as loudly, were not legally silenced. The legal rights of Viking women painted a picture far removed from the passive, subservient figure often imagined. They were property owners, legal agents, and individuals with the power to make significant decisions about their own lives and their families' futures. The laws of the Viking Age, imperfect as they may have been, provided a framework that acknowledged women's autonomy and economic contributions, setting them apart in significant ways from many of their contemporaries across the medieval world. Their legal standing was not a myth, but a deeply embedded part of their dynamic society. Number 2. Viking women were unhygienic or crude. Popular culture often paints a picture of the Viking Age as a time of rough, unkempt people living in squalor. When it comes to Viking women, this image often extends to assumptions of poor hygiene and a general lack of refinement. Many might imagine them as dirty, clad in coarse, unwashed garments, and having little concern for personal appearance. This perception, however, clashes sharply with the wealth of archaeological evidence and historical accounts that reveal a surprisingly high standard of personal hygiene and an appreciation for cleanliness and fine craftsmanship among Viking women. Archaeological excavations across Scandinavia and other Viking Age settlements have unearthed a remarkable array of grooming tools. These finds consistently include combs made from bone, antler, or wood, often intricately carved and beautifully decorated. These combs are found in both male and female graves, indicating that both sexes valued neat hair and beards. But beyond combs, archaeologists have found ear spoons, tweezers, and nail cleaners, sometimes combined into elegant, compact grooming kits. These sets suggest a regular, ritualized approach to personal care, far removed from any image of neglect. The prevalence of these items in grave goods also indicates their importance in daily life, and perhaps even as symbols of personal status. Bathing was a common practice in Viking society, not an occasional luxury. The evidence from sagas and place names suggests the existence of bathhouses, particularly in areas with hot springs like Iceland. The Icelandic sagas mention characters bathing regularly, sometimes for hygiene, sometimes for ritual purification. Archaeological sites have revealed structures that interpret as bathhouses, often with heating systems. Rivers, lakes, and even simple wooden tubs likely served for washing. This regular immersion in water, whether hot or cold, points to a cultural emphasis on cleanliness. It was not just about removing dirt, it was part of their daily routine and social norms. Beyond physical cleanliness, Viking women paid considerable attention to their clothing and personal adornment. Excavations at sites like Birka, a major Viking Age trading hub in Sweden, have revealed thousands of beads, brooches, and other pieces of jewelry in female graves. These items are often made from imported glass, silver, bronze, and even gold, showcasing a sophisticated taste and access to a wide range of materials. The clothing worn by Viking women, as indicated by textile fragments and burial reconstruction, was far from crude. They wove wool and linen into complex patterns, often dyeing them with vibrant colors extracted from plants. Embroidery was a common skill, adorning garments with intricate designs. This level of craftsmanship and investment in clothing speaks volumes about their desire for a refined appearance, not just for practicality, but also for social signaling and aesthetic pleasure. Textile production itself was a highly skilled craft within Viking society, and women were the primary weavers and textile artists. They used upright looms to create various types of cloth, from coarse sailcloth to fine, delicate fabrics for clothing. The complexity of their weaving patterns, some of which survive as impressions on metal artifacts or as preserved fragments, demonstrates a mastery of textile techniques. The Oseberg Ship Burial, a lavish burial mound in Norway dating to the early 9th century, contained an extraordinary array of textiles, including richly embroidered tapestries and finely woven fabrics. These textiles likely belonged to the two high-status women buried there and serve as a testament to the skill and artistry invested in their clothing and home furnishings. This level of dedication to fine textiles directly contradicts any notion of a crude or unkempt people. The use of soap-like substances is also supported by archaeological finds. While not identical to modern soap, evidence suggests the use of lye ash and water mixed with animal fats to create an alkaline solution for washing both bodies and clothing. This substance would have been effective in removing dirt and grime. The presence of such cleansing agents indicates a deliberate and systematic approach to maintaining personal hygiene. Furthermore, Viking men and women were known for their well-groomed hair, often braided or tied back, and many sagas describe characters with fair hair or beautiful appearance. This focus on aesthetics in their literary traditions mirrors the archaeological evidence of their grooming habits. It is important to remember that medieval standards of hygiene differed from modern ones, but within their own context, the Vikings, and particularly Viking women, maintained a remarkably high level of cleanliness and personal presentation. They valued clean bodies, neat hair, and finely made clothing, using a range of tools and techniques to achieve this. The idea that Viking women were unhygienic or crude is a misconception that collapses when faced with the tangible evidence of their daily lives, their tools, their crafts, and their burial customs. Their world was one of practicality, yes, but also one of considered beauty and personal care. Number 3. Viking women were only focused on procreation or family line. A common perception of women in historical societies, including the Viking Age, often reduces their role primarily to childbearing and maintaining the family lineage. This view suggests that their worth and contributions were almost entirely tied to their ability to produce heirs. While procreation was undoubtedly important for the continuation of families and communities in Viking society, limiting Viking women to this single function overlooks the immense breadth of their skills, their economic contributions, and their significant roles in exploration, settlement, and cultural life. Viking women were artisans, craftswomen, managers, explorers, and often crucial contributors to family wealth and status far beyond the cradle. The archaeological finds from the Oseberg Ship Burial in Norway offer a powerful rebuttal to the idea that women were solely focused on reproduction. This elaborate burial, dating to around 834 AD, contained the remains of 2 women, one older and one younger, surrounded by an astonishing array of grave goods. These included intricate carvings, tools, household items, and, most notably, a wealth of textiles. The quality and artistic complexity of these textiles, from fine weaves to elaborate tapestries depicting mythical scenes, suggests that the women buried there were either skilled craftswomen themselves or patrons of the highest artistic talent. The presence of weaving tools in other female graves across the Viking world further emphasizes that textile production was a highly valued and widespread skill among women. Weaving was not just a domestic chore, it was a complex art form, and the production of high-quality cloth was a major economic activity, with textiles being valuable trade goods. This demonstrates that women contributed significantly to the economy through their specialized skills. Viking women were also central to the establishment of new settlements. When the Vikings embarked on their voyages of exploration and colonization, women were often part of these expeditions. The settlement of Iceland, Greenland, and even attempts at Vinland, North America involved women. They were not merely passive passengers, they played an active role in establishing homes, clearing land, raising families, and managing the initial stages of farming in these new, often harsh environments. The sagas, such as Landnámabók, the Book of Settlements, document numerous women who were among the first settlers in Iceland, often as landowners and heads of households in their own right, managing resources and overseeing the construction of new communities. Their journey across perilous seas and their subsequent efforts to build a life in an unknown land speak to their resilience, adaptability, and adventurous spirit, challenging the notion of a life confined only to procreation. Beyond textiles, Viking women engaged in a variety of skilled crafts. Evidence suggests they were involved in bead making, creating intricate necklaces and ornaments that adorned both themselves and others. They produced leather goods, prepared food in sophisticated ways for preservation, and managed complex household economies that could involve hundreds of people and vast resources. The management of a large Viking Age farm or estate required immense organizational skills, knowledge of animal husbandry, agriculture, food preservation, and resource allocation. This role often fell to the mistress of the house, who ensured the smooth operation of the entire enterprise, often in the absence of men. This was a challenging managerial position requiring intelligence, foresight, and strong leadership, qualities far beyond mere biological function. The personal adornment of Viking women also reveals their status and individual expression. Brooches, often worn in pairs to fasten dresses, were not just functional items. They were often exquisitely crafted pieces of jewelry, some of which were imported from distant lands, showcasing wealth and connections. Beads of glass, amber, and silver were strung into elaborate necklaces. These items were personal statements of identity, status, and aesthetic preference. They indicated a woman's wealth, her family's standing, and her individual taste. This focus on personal presentation and the display of wealth through adornment suggests that a woman's worth was tied to more than just her fertility. It was linked to her social standing, her family's prosperity, and her own refined sense of self. The focus on lineage was indeed important, as it was in many pre-modern societies, but this did not solely translate to procreation. The concept of kin was central to Viking society, and women played a vital role in maintaining and transmitting this kin identity. They remembered genealogies, passed down family lore, and often formed crucial alliances through marriage. However, their value within the kin group was not solely based on the number of children they bore. Their wisdom, their wealth, their connections, their skills in diplomacy, and their ability to manage complex households all contributed to their standing and the strength of the family line. The idea that Viking women were solely focused on procreation and family line is a simplification that overlooks the rich and multifaceted lives they led. They were active participants in the economic, social, and exploratory ventures of their age. Their skills as artisans, their leadership in new settlements, their managerial capabilities, and their sophisticated sense of personal adornment all demonstrate that their worth extended far beyond their biological capacity. They were vital, contributing members of Viking society in countless ways, shaping its culture, its economy, and its expansion. Number 4. Viking women had no religious or spiritual power. In many popular depictions of Viking society, the religious and spiritual sphere is often presented as an exclusively male domain. It is easy to imagine that all priests, cult leaders, and figures of spiritual authority were men, and that women were merely passive observers or participants in domestic rituals. However, historical and archaeological evidence strongly indicates that Viking women held significant religious and spiritual power, often serving as seers, priestesses, and practitioners of powerful magic. Their roles were not just supportive, but central to the spiritual life of their communities, bridging the gap between the mundane and the divine. The most compelling evidence for women's spiritual authority comes from the phenomenon of the vulva, plural volor. A vulva was a female seeress or prophetess, a practitioner of satyr, a form of Old Norse magic that involved divination, prophecy, and sometimes influencing fate. These women were highly respected, and sometimes feared, figures in Viking society. They would travel from settlement to settlement, offering their services, often performing rituals that involved trance and ecstatic experiences. The sagas, particularly Eric the Red's saga, provide detailed accounts of Valor and their rituals. Thorbjorg Little Volva, for example, is described performing a satyr ritual in Greenland, predicting the future and the end of a famine. Her arrival, the special seat prepared for her, and the respect shown to her by the community underscore her high status and the perceived potency of her powers. Archaeological finds support the existence and importance of Valor. Graves unearthed across Scandinavia have revealed women buried with distinctive staffs, sometimes made of iron, bronze, or wood, and often adorned. These staffs are interpreted by archaeologists as symbols of the Volva's office, akin to a shaman's staff or a priestess's wand. One notable example is the grave of a woman from Klinta, Åland, Sweden, buried with a large, elaborate staff and other objects associated with ritual practice. Another find at Furkat, Denmark, uncovered the grave of a woman containing not only a staff but also a small bag with seeds of henbane, a plant known for its hallucinogenic properties, which could have been used to induce trance states during satyr rituals. These material remnants strongly suggest that these women held unique spiritual roles. Beyond the formal role of vulva, women also likely played a significant part in domestic religious practices. The veneration of household deities, ancestors, and the practice of minor rituals to ensure good fortune for the farm or family often fell to the mistress of the house. While large-scale communal sacrifices might have been led by male chieftains or priests, the daily spiritual care and protection of the home were often managed by women. They would have overseen offerings, spoken prayers, and maintained the sacred spaces within the household, ensuring the well-being of the family through spiritual means. Women also appear in the sagas and mythological texts as figures connected to healing and wisdom. They are often depicted as having knowledge of herbs, medicinal plants, and traditional remedies. This practical knowledge often intertwined with spiritual beliefs, as healing was often seen as a combination of natural remedies and appeals to divine powers or magical intervention. The mythical figures of goddesses like Freya, who is associated with cider, fertility, love, and war, and Frigg, associated with marriage, motherhood, and foresight, also reflect the deep cultural understanding of powerful female divine beings. Their existence in the pantheon suggests a societal acceptance of powerful female entities in the spiritual realm, which could have been mirrored by women's roles on Earth. But runes, the ancient Germanic alphabet, were not just a writing system, but were also believed to possess magical properties. While runestones are often associated with men, archaeological finds, particularly of smaller runic objects like amulets or charms, sometimes appear in female graves. This suggests that women also had knowledge of runes and their potential for magical use, whether for protection, healing, or divination. The ability to read, write, and utilize runes for magical purposes would have been a source of significant spiritual authority. The presence of amulets and protective charms in female graves also indicates their personal engagement with spiritual practices. These objects, often depicting mythological figures, symbols, or animals, were believed to offer protection or bring good fortune. Their common appearance in women's burials suggests an active role in seeking spiritual protection and influencing their own fate through magical means. The elaborate grave of the Oseberg ship burial, containing two women of high status, also contain items that have been interpreted as ritual objects, suggesting that these women were central figures in their community's religious life, perhaps even priestesses of a cult. The idea that Viking women lacked religious or spiritual power is a misconception that overlooks substantial evidence. From the revered Volva with her staff and powerful satyr magic, to the mistress of the house performing daily domestic rituals, and the very goddesses they worshipped, women were integral to the spiritual fabric of Viking society. They were not just passive participants, they were active, powerful figures who held unique and important roles in connecting their communities to the divine and influencing fate through their spiritual gifts. Number 5. Shield maidens were a myth or extremely rare. The image of the Shield Maiden, a fierce female warrior battling alongside men, has long captured the imagination. From legendary figures like Lagertha in the sagas to contemporary fantasy art, the idea of a Viking woman wielding a sword is both compelling and pervasive. However, a common historical misconception often dismisses shield maidens as pure myth, a romanticized invention of later storytellers, or at best, an extremely rare anomaly without real historical basis. The argument typically points to the lack of extensive, undeniable evidence of women regularly serving as professional warriors. Yet, a closer look at archaeological discoveries and a nuanced interpretation of saga literature, along with recent scientific analysis, suggests that the reality was far more complex than simple myth. The existence of women who fought, or were at least prepared to fight, is not entirely confined to the realm of fiction. But perhaps the most significant piece of archaeological evidence challenging the myth argument came to light with the re-evaluation of grave BA 581 from Birka, Sweden. Birka was a major Viking Age trading town. In 1878, a richly furnished warrior grave was excavated there, containing a sword, axe, spear, shield, and 2 horses. For over a century, the individual buried in this grave was assumed to be a male warrior, a high-status Viking chieftain. But a 2017 study led by archaeologist Charlotte Hedenstierna Johnson, using DNA analysis of the bones, revealed that the individual was biologically female. This discovery sent ripples through the archaeological community. While the presence of weapons in a grave does not automatically confirm the deceased was a combatant, this combination of high-status warrior grave goods, strategic location within the burial ground, and the DNA evidence for a female individual presents a powerful argument for the existence of high-ranking female warriors, or at least women with military leadership roles in Viking society. The woman in BJ 581 was not just buried with weapons, she was buried in a way that signaled her as a professional warrior, a leader of men. Further archaeological finds, though perhaps less definitive than BJ 581, also contribute to the discussion. A number of female graves have been found throughout Scandinavia and other Viking settlements that contain weapons. These include axes, knives, and spears. While some argue these might be symbolic or simply items of status rather than tools for combat, their consistent appearance in some female burials, sometimes alongside other typically male grave goods, prompts questions. Some female skeletal remains have also shown healed wounds or injuries consistent with battle or strenuous physical activity, although definitively attributing these to combat rather than accidents in daily life can be challenging. Nevertheless, the accumulated evidence suggests that at least some women possessed were buried with and potentially used weapons. The sagas, while semi-legendary and written down centuries after the Viking Age, often reflect earlier oral traditions and societal possibilities. They frequently tell tales of shield maidens, strong female characters who not only defend themselves, but actively participate in battles and lead armies. Where characters like Lagertha, described in Saxo Grammaticus's Gesta Danorum, is portrayed as a skilled warrior who fought alongside Ragnar Lothbrok. Hervor from Hervorar's saga Oke Hydrex is another prominent example. She takes up her father's cursed sword, Tarfing, and fights as a warrior, even challenging her father's ghost to reclaim it. While these are stories, their prevalence suggests that the idea of a female warrior was culturally understandable and perhaps even admired within Viking society. They were not presented as monstrous or impossible beings, but as exceptional, powerful individuals within their world. The role of women in the defense of settlements also deserves consideration. When men were away on long voyages for raiding or trading, women were left to defend their homes and communities. It is reasonable to assume that they would have been trained in basic self-defense and the use of weapons to protect their families and property from attack. Evidence of fortified homesteads and communities suggests a need for collective defense, where every able-bodied individual, regardless of gender, might have been expected to contribute. The practicalities of life in the Viking Age, with its unpredictable raids and conflicts, might have necessitated a more fluid definition of who could fight. Some scholars point to the mythological figures of the Valkyries as further evidence of a cultural archetype of female warriors. Valkyries, divine female beings who choose who lives and dies in battle and carry fallen warriors to Valhalla, are powerful, armed, and deeply connected to warfare. While mythological, these figures embody the idea of strong, formidable women associated with combat and death, which could have influenced or reflected societal views on the potential for women as warriors. The discussion around shield maidens is not about whether every Viking woman was a warrior, but whether the concept was purely fictional or if some women actively participated in warfare or held military roles. The discovery at BJ 581, combined with other archaeological hints and the pervasive nature of shield maiden stories in the sagas, argues strongly against a blanket dismissal of their existence. It suggests that while perhaps not widespread, some women in the Viking Age could and did achieve positions of martial renown, challenging modern preconceptions about gender roles in a fierce and dynamic historical period. The reality of Viking women appears to have encompassed a spectrum of roles, including, for some, the path of the warrior. Number 6. Viking women were merely domestic housewives or submissive. A widely held misconception about Viking women is that their lives were confined almost entirely to the domestic sphere. They are often pictured as subservient figures bound to the hearth, occupied only with cooking, cleaning, and child-rearing, with little to no influence outside the confines of their home. This narrow view ignores a vast amount of evidence that portrays Viking women as dynamic, influential, and often powerful individuals who played crucial roles in the economy, law, and social structure of their communities. Far from being merely domestic housewives, many Viking women were active participants in trade, property management, and even public life, exercising a significant degree of agency. Viking women were indeed responsible for managing the household, but this was a far more complex and demanding role than modern interpretations often suggest. The Viking Age household was often a self-sufficient economic unit, especially in rural areas. The mistress of the house, the husfreyja, oversaw everything from food production and preservation to clothing manufacture and the management of farm laborers and slaves. This was a demanding managerial position requiring extensive knowledge of agriculture, animal husbandry, resource allocation, and a keen eye for organization. She was responsible for the economic well-being of the entire household, ensuring enough food, fuel, and supplies for everyone living on the farm, sometimes a considerable number of people. This role was not simply domestic, it was an economic cornerstone of Viking society. Evidence of women's economic prowess extends beyond the farm. Archaeological excavations at major trading hubs like Birka in Sweden and Kaupang in Norway have yielded fascinating insights. And female graves at these sites have been found to contain not only domestic tools like weaving implements but also scales and weights, traditionally associated with trade and commerce. The presence of these tools in women's burials suggests that Viking women were directly involved in buying and selling goods, acting as merchants and traders. They might have managed their own businesses, participated in local markets, or even overseen the trade of valuable goods produced on their farms, such as textiles, dairy products, or furs. This active participation in commerce indicates a significant economic agency that goes far beyond simple household chores. Saga literature, though semi-historical, offers numerous examples of women who held considerable authority and influence. Odd, the deep-minded otter Jupudga from Erbigja Saga, and Lanamabok is a particularly striking example. After her husband and son died, she led an expedition of kin and thralls from Scotland to Iceland, where she established a significant settlement. She commanded ships, organized the colonization of new land, and strategically distributed land to her followers and family members. Her leadership was not merely domestic, it was an act of large-scale colonization and governance, demonstrating immense power and decision-making authority in a public and economic sphere. Her story highlights a woman as a powerful chieftain and settler, completely overturning the idea of women being confined to the home. The production of textiles was a crucial industry in the Viking Age, and it was primarily the domain of women. From spinning wool to weaving elaborate patterns, Viking women produced not only clothing for their families, but also valuable trade goods, including sailcloth for their ships. The skill required to produce fine textiles was considerable, and the economic value of these products was immense. The Oseberg ship burial, containing two high-status women, was filled with incredibly rich and complex textiles, some of the finest examples of Viking Age craftsmanship. This not only underscores women's skill, but also their contribution to the overall wealth and trade networks of their society. Their weaving tools were not just domestic implements, they were instruments of economic production. Viking women also held significant status within the family structure. As the Husfreyja, she was the keeper of the keys, literally and symbolically. Keys found in female graves emphasized their control over the household's resources, including its storage, valuables, and provisions. This control translated into real power over the household's economy and management. Furthermore, women often held the family's honor and reputation in their hands. They could instigate feuds, demand compensation for wrongs, and use their influence to sway legal disputes or political alliances. The sagas are replete with powerful women who advise, influence, and even provoke the actions of men, demonstrating their social and political impact far beyond what a submissive role would suggest. Even in marriage, Viking women were not always subservient. They brought dowries to the marriage, which remained their own property, giving them a degree of financial independence. They also had the right to divorce, under certain circumstances, offering them an escape from abusive or unsatisfactory marriages. This legal right, relatively rare for women in other contemporary societies, speaks volumes about their agency and standing. Their ability to dissolve a marriage on their own terms suggests a society where women had a voice and a recognized legal status. The notion that Viking women were merely domestic housewives or submissive is a gross oversimplification. While managing the home was certainly a central part of their lives, this role encompassed vast economic responsibility and managerial power. Beyond the home, women were active in trade, exploration, settlement, and held significant social and legal agency. They were vital, contributing members of Viking society whose influence extended across economic, legal, and social spheres, shaping the very fabric of their communities and beyond. Their lives were rich, varied, and often remarkably powerful.